Hey there, and welcome back to another devlog. It's been quite a while, hasn't it? Well, I haven't been doing nothing, so in the background you can see I'm modeling and I will be texturing and implementing the fuel tank, the first of many fuel tanks that can be used for rocket construction. Um, I was just getting my reference pictures there, and now I got the basic cylinder up. And while that plays in the background, so what's been going on here? Well, it's obviously been quite a while, and there's a lot of things going on in the world, so not as much progress as I'd like. So I'm a little behind, but I have been getting work done this whole time, if not as much. One of the many things I've added is I finally finished implementing the post-processing system. It's not really necessary right now, but it didn't take too long to implement, and it makes the game look a whole lot better. And it will be something I'm going to rely pretty heavily on in the future as well for the graphical aspect of the game. So I figured I may as well get that done now. In addition to that, the textures and all that will be updated. That still has yet to happen. Uh, the scope of that update will probably be a lot less than what I was originally planning, mostly due to lost time because of COVID. But that shouldn't be too big of a deal. Anyway, when I was updating the game engine to the newest version of Unity, because the current version of the game runs on a 2016 version of Unity, which is missing a lot of features, mainly a lot of features that are needed for the voxel system as it stands right now. So I updated to the 2018 long-term support version originally, and then I looked forward into the newer versions and saw that they had actually implemented the post-processing stack as a built-in feature rather than something you had to add on yourself. So I went ahead and just jumped forward to that 2019 version, which is what the new update is going to run on. Um, and that made it much easier getting all the post-processing stuff working. But yeah, between that, the texture update, and the addition of an atmosphere, because I finally figured out how to get a system that looks semi-decent with the atmosphere. It's still got a lot of work needed, but at least it's a lot better than it was before. The game is looking a whole lot better. I've also gotten a lot better at making textures, as you will see here. Still, again, not the best, but it's vastly better than the textures I originally had, which were very flat, very little detail in them. Anyway, in the background, you can see I've been working on the tank this whole time. The part that I'm adding in right now is fuel tanks. Most people don't really know this. They think it's just like a cylindrical tank, but fuel tanks actually usually are uh, have they'll have multiple tanks in what most people will call a single fuel tank for the liquid fuel and the oxidizer, and you need to have pipes that can take the fuel or oxidizer, whichever's in your upper tank, and bring it down below to your engine. And these pipes, on some of the newer rockets, like the Starship rocket that SpaceX is currently building, their downcomer pipe actually is internal. It goes through the rocket. But if you look on some of the older pictures of like the Saturn V or the Titan II, the Titan II GLV, especially if you look on that, it's really prominent in some of the pictures I found. Is you'll have this big pipe on the outside. Most rockets have that. It's only fairly recent, as far as my understanding of it is, that those have begun to move inside the rocket. Mostly because when they're inside, they take up volume that the tanks could be taking up, and you cost yourself some fuel there. So, but I don't know the trade-off between losing that fuel versus how much additional fuel you have to burn by having it sitting out in the air, where it's going to cause drag. Um, anyway, so I was adding that, and here I'm trying to. So I want to. Yeah, I kept feeling like the tank was a little too, two-dimensional. It didn't have enough shape to it. So what I decided to do was on the ends, I decided to have them inset a little bit and then have like the spherical end caps of the upper and lower bulkheads for the tanks. So just give it a little bit extra shape, which is what I'm doing here. I ended up coloring those orange, because I started playing space games by playing KSP. So I was kind of inspired by the size 3 fuel tanks they have, the Carbonine rocket fuel tanks that they have, which are white, and then they have like that inset on the ends, and then it comes out into like an orange cylindrical cap, and that's what I was kind of inspired to build it off of. I do apologize, just while I've noticed it, for the kind of laggy look the video has. I'm not really sure what the issue with that is. I think it's just a processing issue with my computer because I work on a pretty old laptop I've been meaning to upgrade for some time now. I can promise you I am not working at 3 frames a second, and when you get to see gameplay, I usually have to speed it up to 250 times, not 200, 250%, just to make it look semi-smooth. And that's not like a performance issue. That is, for some reason, the capture software, like, I did this was all running at like 60 frames. The game normally runs at like a nice 30, 40, 50 frames, which is not too bad considering there's like no optimization done for it yet. Um, so for some reason, the recording software that I use, which I have tried other recording softwares, and they all either just have the same problem or don't work at all, but it just records at like a ridiculously low frame rate, and I think that's just a hardware issue, so that will probably be fixed when I move to a better computer. But here we are. I finally finished modeling. I was happy with what I got, so now I go through the very boring and slow process of unwrapping the textures, the problem of taking a three-dimensional object and perfectly flattening it into a two-dimensional plane while preserving as much detail as possible. It's kind of annoying, and then of course, here I am in GIMP, my texture editor, setting up the base texture. I finally figured out, so before I would always have to like export it from the texture editor and then reopen it, and then I realized while messing around in Blender, my modeler, that there's a key you can just click to refresh the texture, and I was like, yeah, I felt really stupid when I did that. Of course, it's funny though that the cylindrical object, you saw it there, that really crazy curvy projection, that's the cylindrical projection. It's funny that the cylinder, because even if you know like how the projections work, you sit down and like it kind of makes it funny that the flat sides of the cylinder are going to be all curvy like that on a cylindrical projection. But I guess that's how it decided it wanted to do it. So here we are using a cube projection, and this is going to take quite some time. So you might notice I'm kind of bouncing around between talking about what's going on in the video and what's going on kind of more long-term for the game as a whole. I don't really script out these videos. I feel like I like these videos to be more of a personal, kind of just sit down and casually talk about what I've been doing for the game and whatnot. Unfortunately, it does take a surprising amount of work. It takes almost 6-7 hours from outside of the actual work that I use as the background footage, just to edit it all together, record it, get to somewhere I'm happy, export it, and then upload it, and do all that stuff. And of course I have terrible equipment too, so I don't, I'm recording on this laptop and I don't actually have a mic, so I have to use the built-in. So if you hear that annoying buzz in the background, that's the fan of the laptop. But yeah, so that's why every once in a while you'll hear me, I'll kind of stutter, or I'll do exactly what I just did there, or I just have a pause, or I say or a lot. That's essentially why, as this is not scripted, I'm talking on the fly here. I do a little bit of editing, go back and redo bits and pieces when I feel like it just, you don't need to listen to 6 seconds of solid silence where I go, but I usually edit that out, and I'm not even sure if I'm going to keep that in. I think I probably will edit it out. This usually takes several takes to get the audio to work, or the audio to be somewhere I like, and then even then I have to go and, just as I was saying, go through and recapture bits and pieces. But yeah, so I finished the sides of it, and I was getting the top and bottom of this tank as far as the unwrapping the projection. Here I am getting the downcomer pipe on the side, and this takes a long time. This took probably the longest part of any of it. Like, it took longer than the modeling, and it took longer than the texturing, just because there's no real fast way to do it. You can if you're making a model, you can put low effort into it, and you can make a very, I could just spawn in a cylinder and call it a day for the model. I could just bucket fill a blank texture white and call it a day for the fuel tank. But for the unwrapping, um, the fastest I could do that would probably be 30-40 minutes, just to take everything and just squeeze it down. And then even then, you have to have a uniform texture. The more detail you put into your texture, the more detail you have to put into your unwrap. And of course, the more detail you put into your model, the more detail you put into your texture unwrap. So it, you know, increasing the detail of the texture or the model vastly increases the time taken to unwrap the model to get it to look nice, because you're basically taking your model, flattening it out, and then lining it up with the texture, which predictably, as you might imagine, is why the increased detail on either end causes the middle step, the unwrapping, to take longer. You have to spend longer lining it up if it's a higher detail texture, and you have to spend longer unwrapping it if it's a high detail model, and it adds up pretty quickly. This was this was kind of simultaneously a fun bit, as far as like you get to peel it apart and see all the bits, but also it's very arduous. You just kind of sit there like, when will it end? And it doesn't end for quite some time. I always hate this. I like to, when I make these little sections here, I like to line them up in the order that it actually goes. I pick the direction clockwise or counterclockwise pretty much randomly, but I like to line them up in such a way, so that way it's like, you could just follow it around and you just get one big line of it. But that like almost never works, and I think it's because the projection. It's like if you were to look at the 3D object from one side and flatten it usually. So like things end up getting inverted on the back side, is my theory for why it happens. But you end up getting like this weird inversion, and like you can't just put things in a nice neat line. So you end up having to stack them on top of each other. And I mean, even if you do want to put them in a nice neat line, you need a really big texture for that, just because it takes up so much space. And if you want to preserve any real detail in it, because that's the other thing, is the way you unwrap the texture. It isn't just determining where you're going to paint on your texture map, but it also determines a lot, the actual size of the sections in the texture unwrap versus the actual size of the texture, and the detail of the texture determines the actual resolution on, the actual detail present on the final model. So I could have a gigantic 4K texture, and it would be all great, but if I took all the different model bits and then I shrunk them down really, really small, they would look like I was, really low detail, like a 16 pixel texture kind of thing. So you have to kind of balance it out, and that does mean that the larger the model, the larger the texture has to be to preserve it, unless you split up the texture into multiple like separate textures for each section, which I haven't done yet, so I'm not exactly sure how that would work. Obviously, you could probably do it in theory, probably wouldn't be too hard, but I would not be eager to spend another several hours of my day doing that. So here you can see I finally started modeling or painting the texture. I wanted the sides of it to be a nice white, a little off-white, and I wanted the end caps, as far as like all the insides and the divots, to be gray, and then I wanted the actual end caps themselves to be like a nice orange, and then the downcomer pipe to be black, which is the texture I ended up with. It was really funny because if you hit Alt R, that refreshes the texture if you're clicked on the texture window in Blender. But if you're clicked on the model window in Blender and you hit Alt R, I'm not sure what it does. Like it like grabs part of it and part of the model and like stretches it out into like kind of curve. You probably saw it back there. So like every once in a while, I would go and I would hit Alt R to refresh it, but it would auto select the model for some reason. It would do something crazy. Here you can see I wasn't sure exactly what color I wanted for those end caps, so I started off with like this weird yellow kind of grayish color, and I mean, at first it kind of looked okay, but the more I painted with it, I realized, probably don't want that on the finished model, so I just, something much closer to like a Space Shuttle orange kind of color, and I thought it blended a little bit better. And then, here we go, I get into the bit where I I get into the details. So you get like this basic texture, and then and then you go, and I found you pick your color, and then you make two shades, one slightly below and one slightly above, and then you just spot it all around the actual texture, and you go and you blur it all so it all blends together, and then you go and you use an HSV noise layer over all of it, um, to give it a little bit extra detail. So I haven't gotten to the noise yet. You can see I just did the blur. I ended up having to make a little change here, and I wanted to, but I had to end up like going back and re-blurring it after the change. So I just undid it all the way back before the blur, made the change, and then re-blurred it. So you see that's that step, and then I go and I check it all, and like I've got all these weird bits that kind of bleed over, and I kind of looked for them in the model, but I couldn't find them, and here I am putting the HSV noise layer on. I don't know how well it comes through onto the video, but there you go. You can see it much better in the bottom texture window. It kind of gives a little bit of extra detail. It makes it takes a second to look to kind of realize what you're looking at. If you zoom in real close, it doesn't look that great, but from a distance, it kind of just adds a little something extra. And of course, you see all the bright bloom from the post-processing. And then I had a heart attack here because the way the texture gets put on to the model using material. Normally that's saved in the unwrap of the model, which is saved with the model. I had a heart attack there because it looks like it wasn't. I've had that happen to me before, and you have to go back and completely redo the model. But it turned out it was like it had decided that it would saturate everything super high gray, and then it would like paint over. So all the details were still there. They were just all really similar shades of gray, and I couldn't tell. So I'm not quite sure what was there. Of course, this is the annoying bit. So when I made that engine model, I had thought, oh, I want it to be 1.25 meters in diameter. So in the window, I put 1.25 meters in the starting cylinder. The problem was that was the radius. So it actually ended up being 2.5 meters at full scale. So then I had to make it play nice with this, which is 1.25 meters. And I did actually check. You probably saw me pull out the calculator in the very beginning. So that was, I had to and it's still not perfectly lined up. And here I am messing around with the prefab. So you set it up and you create a prefab, and that way you can just copy paste the prefab however you want. So I'm setting up the collider. The mesh colliders are really wonky in Unity. They can take some work to get to work exactly the way you want. The biggest annoyance that comes with mesh colliders is it's hard to give something a mesh collider and then give it a rigid body at the same time, so it can be affected by physics. You can move it around without a rigid body, but to make it actually affected by physics, you have to do some stuff. And here we'll jump forward, and this is a little test run, little preview of the upcoming update. There's still a lot of stuff missing. You can see the throttle there and in the corner. That's one of a number of UI changes I'm going to be making. And then the nice glint. That took me, you are required to appreciate that glint, because that took me like 6 hours to get to look right, and the input of several people. You probably haven't noticed it yet, but there's a really annoying glitch that I've been struggling to solve for some time now, and that's, for some reason, the dark side of the planet does not cast a shadow on the rocket. I got it to work for a little bit, and it stopped. And of course, we finish off with the beautiful sunrise there, and then we'll come around for one last pass right out over the daylight side of the planet, and then you'd see the new atmosphere there, and then basically be signing off at that point. But yeah, this is a lot of work done, not as much as I'd like, but still even more to go.